Welcome back to our module series, Become a Pro Communicator. Let's continue.
We rely on the use of stereotypes, whether we are aware of them or not. Now, one characteristic of stereotyping is the speed with which we do it. Unfortunately, this method of person perception, or this stage, tends to lend a lot of people to be discriminated against, and it also leads a lot of people to feel excluded. In this area, studies have shown that we invoke stereotypes of people based solely on their skin color, their height, their weight, their attractiveness, their facial features, clothing, speech accent, facial expressions, and other mannerisms and attributes. It could be even their selected use of grammar upon which they're being judged in the snap judgment stage. Now, also, it's important to know that there are affective reaction stereotype judgments that occur at the snap judgment stage, upon which people are characterized based on their appearance and or their behavior. Now, while this is similar to the attention stage, do know that the output of the attention stage consists of selecting and categorizing. Now, when we move to the causal inference stage, here, this process of person perception is making causal inferences about a person's behavior. In short, seeking an answer to the question, why did the person do that? These inferences about why someone did something are commonly referred to in the field of scholarly work as attributions. To illustrate, one of the examples that are provided in the text is, suppose you go out to lunch at a local restaurant. When your server arrives, a young woman named Laura, you take notice of how friendly she is. She greets you enthusiastically with a big smile. She engages in you with friendly banter and so on. If you ask yourself, why is she being so friendly, you would be engaging in the process of attribution. Now, another example here is that attribution can carry along two dimensions: internal, external, and reactive purposive. So the internal external dimension focuses on the perceived source of causation. An internal attribution sees the person as the cause. An external attribution sees an outside source as the cause. In this example, the internal analysis could be that she's just friendly, but the external analysis could be that she's just doing what her job demands. What many of us in this particular situation would consider is the fact that we associate in our personal perception process that she's being super nice because she wants a super high tip. And the reactive purpose dimension focuses on perceived volition associated with the behavior. A reactive attribution sees the behavior as relatively involuntary, where a purpose attribution sees the behavior as voluntary. If you decide that the person in this example was friendly because she wanted a big tip, you would be making a purposive attribution. If you decide that she was friendly because that's the way she acts and she was just being spontaneous, you would be making a reactive attribution. Notice that both attributions were internal. Can you think of how both might be external instead? Take another example. Suppose you're driving in the right lane on the interstate, and all of a sudden the driver on your left cuts in front of you without signaling. We actually talked about this in some of our group conversations. What kind of attribution would you make about the driver? No, you can't say that they're a jerk. That's not one of the options in our discussion. However, what can make an attribution that is internal and purposive, and internal and reactive, external and purpose, and external and reactive? The distinctions are important because of the connection between the type of attribution we make about a person's behavior and our subsequent attitude towards the person. In the example of the driver, how would your feelings about the driver be different if you made an internal attribution rather than an external attribution? So here, when we're talking about purpose, we're talking on the internal side. The driver cut me off because he wanted to switch lanes and he didn't care about where I was. The external purpose, it would be the driver cut me off because there was a truck following closely behind him that he wanted to avoid. Another person perception consideration is the reactive internal, which signifies something along the lines of this: the driver cut me off because he's a careless person. The external reactive would fall into the lines of the driver cut me off because of the two lanes merging into a single lane ahead and he didn't see me. So do understand that when you understand the interpersonal communication process and how many of these situations can be reframed, that one situation had several connotations. So when you slow down and learn how you are processing your perception of that person's behavior, conversation, or actions, it's important in understanding these different scholarly theories helps you process situations that will not leave you playing an internegative script. The next stage we're going to talk about is the impression formation stage. And in this stage, the person's perception process is forming an overall impression of the person. During this stage, we begin to view a person more fully as a composite of a personality trait. We form an overall impression of someone by relying on what social psychologists call an implicit personality theory. An individual's belief that certain traits are related to other traits in a meaningful and consistent way. So, for instance, if you knew that a person is ambitious, intelligent, and honest, for example, what other traits do you think that person may have? So instead of you going through the list of traits that that person may have, you in turn just give them an entire new perception of your personal opinion based on 2, 3, or 4 traits that that person has. Now, when we consider whether conscious or not, we tend to fill in the blanks of what that person's personality may or may not be based on a few categories or perceptions that we conclude on. We tend to make what's referred to as closure. Now, closure is an example of when we want to fill in the blanks so that we know enough about a person to explain and ultimately predict future behaviors of that person. Another piece of information that's important and key that you understand in processing personal perception is a central trait. A central trait is one that carries more weight in shaping our impressions than other traits do. For instance, these categorical traits that we tend to give people in determining our perceptions of them could be a label that, again, isn't very nice, but it could be a label that the person is stupid, or the person is nice, or the person is restless, the person is hyper, the person is organized, or the person is unorganized. These are categorical central traits that are more central than peripheral traits. Now, when we think about this entire process from another perspective, we have the prediction stage. The prediction stage of person perception is when we feel comfortable that we have enough labels and we have enough information we've processed about our connection and our contact in observing this person to feel that we can predict their traits or their behavior. Sometimes we want to know that a person will do something in a particular situation. For instance, if you ask someone out to a movie, you may have given some thought as to whether or not that person will say yes or no. Making sense of a person in this way goes beyond forming an overall impression of that person. In fact, it requires that the person makes a future perception analysis of that person. For instance, another example is the fact that when we consider this prediction stage, there are 4 sources of information that we typically contribute to our prediction of what someone will do. For instance, we will consider that person's past behavior in similar situations. We will assess our overall impression of them, our knowledge of the situation, as well as any past behaviors that we've observed this person engage in other situations that may or may not be similar. In this example, in a academic situation, it could be whether or not you've seen a person actively participate and engage in a group project. If that person doesn't have a history of positive traction or positive track record in participating in group projects from beginning to end and owning their part in the project, then the prediction stage comes into play when that person is invited into a group setting to work on a project in another class. In many instances, students find themselves asking, do you know this person in my class? They're in my group. Do you know whether they're a good team member or a good group member or not? Now, when we talk about it in a professional sense, it's whether we want to invite that person in our workspace on our work team or our work project. The same process applies in both situations. Now, when we move this same analogy over to relationships, and when we are building and we're looking for our future partner, again, we think whether or not this person would reciprocate the love and affection that I have for them. We also think about whether that person would like me, like I like them, and whether that person would go out with me if I were to make myself available. So this process and the process of person perception is important both in the academic setting and the professional career setting, as well as the relationship partner setting. So do also know that in our continued talk about this section, perceptions of people are situational. A script is a sequence of events that we expect in certain situations. So do know that when we consider this piece of how situation influence the way we perceive others, one way is by drawing our attention to salient features of individuals related or relative to others in the area. For instance, if we